Hello and welcome back to the Bee Vlog. Today I've got a very special treat for you. I'm going to be doing an inspection on Queen Helen here and taking mite counts using a different method. If you remember my last video, I did mite counts using the sticky boards, and Queen Helen had the highest mite count of 69 mites dropped in 24 hours. So today I'm going to be joined with Dr. Dewey Caron, who is going to be helping me and teaching me how to do mite counts using a different method. This year I was very fortunate to be paired up with Dr. Dewey Caron as my mentor in the Oregon State Master Beekeeping program. Dr. Caron has been a university professor for over 40 years over at the University of Maryland and Delaware. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Yep. And this year, well actually in 2009, he retired and moved to Oregon, where he lives half the year here and the other half of the year lives in Bolivia, where he works with Africanized bees.
Yeah, there I don't have a choice. Do not have a chance to have nice gentle bees there.
Yeah. And this man knows bees. In fact, he wrote a book called Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping, and you can buy that book on Amazon if you want. I'll provide a link down in the show notes. And today he's going to be teaching me how to do mite counts using the alcohol wash and the sugar roll method, right?
Correct. We do both.
Okay.
Now to do a sugar shake, we're going to take a mason jar. Mason jar has a half a cup gradation. We're going to try to take bees from the brood area up to half a cup, fill it in there, and then we're going to add sugar. So we've taken the mason jar cover and replaced it by an 8 mesh hardware cloth.
Okay.
What we're going to look for then is a frame of brood. What we want to do is tilt the frame slightly backwards. Now we can't collect these into the jar. You're just not going to get enough. So what we're going to do is bring the jar down just off of the backs of these bees, and literally they're going to just simply fall into the jar. So by combing downward, we're going to comb. Now we've looked at the frame. We did a quick check. We don't have the queen there. We're doing sugar shake, not quite as critical. We're not going to kill these bees, so if perchance we got the queen, we hope not, but just in case, we're not going to end up killing her. So now we'll tamp them down and see if we've got that half a cup of bees. It looks like we're a little heavy, so we'll tamp them down so that we think we've got our half a cup measure, and so then we'll replace our cover. In doing so, I just lean the frame back in there just to get it out of the way. So now we have a half a cup amounts to about a 300 bee sample. Now we can check the sample and see how good we've done in terms of getting 300 bees. And when you're first doing them, you ought to do 2 or 3 or more to check. Just doesn't have to be exactly 300, but we're making an assumption. Okay. So if it's 250, it's a little light. If it's a 350, it's a little heavy. So somewhere in that range. We're going to add about 2 tablespoons initially of ordinary confectionery sugar. Bees can be on the screen, so we don't want to break off legs and appendages. Let's mush that in. The amount of sugar is not critical. We just want enough to cover the bee bodies in good shape. So we've added a couple tablespoons, and we're going to push it down into without crushing bee legs and proboscis. Okay, and then sort of in a rolling fashion, we're going to distribute that powdered sugar on all of the bee bodies. You can still see a little bit of flight, but we're getting it pretty much distributed. We like to do this, get it distributed. We're essentially washing their bodies of the mites. So it'll take 20 to 30 seconds of trying to get that sugar well distributed. In areas with a higher humidity, this is not quite as easy because the sugar can clump a little bit. And we're going to try to keep it so that it actually is real powdery. Apparently it causes the mites on the backs of the bees or on the thorax, abdomens, to lose their grip, and so they're going to be falling into the mixture here. Now what we'd like to then do is sort of bake the bees in a little bit more humidity, not to dehydration. We're not trying to kill these bees, but we're trying to get that sugar to do its job. So we're going to put these in an area that has a little bit of sun here and let it sit for about the same amount of time, and we'll come back and shake them again.
Okay.
So we're going to put this in the sun for just a half a minute.
Okay.
We sat it then in the sun to let it bake a little bit, not to dehydrate, but to help that sugar loosen the mite's grip on bees. And so now we're shaking for another 20, 30 seconds. We're trying to distribute the sugar onto all those bees. This really is not hurting them, but we find that unless we're kind of vigorous with the shaking, we don't get a good sample. We can check our sample accuracy later after we've checked for mites by reapplying sugar to the very same bees and shaking again and see if we get additional mite. Okay, so we've done the shaking now a couple of times. Now we're going to go ahead and shake out the powdered sugar. The bees, of course, are going to be held by the screen top. So we want to get the powdered sugar out, and right away you're going to see a lot of dark specks, and those are going to actually be the mites that are coming out. Now we can shake legs off. We can do some damage to the bees, so it doesn't necessarily mean every speck is going to be a mite, but it's a good beginning look. Again, sort of that rolling seems to help as well. It helps get the sugar distributed. So there's our pile. We've used a white surface, in this case our hive top surface. If we also want to get a little white pan, you can just shake them right into a white pan, and that works just as well. Okay, now we've got our pile of sugar there and our mites. Now we can just kind of dissolve the sugar away by just a mist of water. And then the mites are going to stick right out. That's going to make counting pretty easy. So we're going to start here. We can just move them off to a side. 1, 2, that's a little bit lighter, but it was still phoretic on mites, or on the bees. 3, 4, 5. You can see we're looking for that size shape. If you need this at this point to bring a magnifier, it'll be easier to count. So, and I like to use a counter. 6, 7, 8, 9, 42, 43. One flew all the way over there, 44. One flew all the way, no, 44. Okay, so we had 44 in our sample of 300. As I indicated, if we want to check, did we really get the majority of mites out of there? Was this a 44 good sample? Because we can just go ahead and repeat, add another. We don't need to add as much. We don't need to shake quite as long. As best we know, this really is not harming the bees, all this shaking. And they're going to be really covered with sugar at the end of this, and so they're going to be in no shape to come out and try to sting anyone. They're all going to be just sugared right down. We can put these bees back in the colony on the entrance, right in the top, whichever way you prefer, and the bees will then go ahead and clean off their sisters of the extra sugar. Now this confectionery sugar has a little bit of starch in it. That's harmful for brood, but the adults with good flight, good weather conditions, can handle that little bit of starch that's in the sugar. And again, I'm not going to put them in the sun this time because we're just trying to check our mite numbers. So let's check a second. Wow. We did not do real well that first time. I can see coming out already some more. Looks like we got, unfortunately, a leg there. Let's go ahead and dissolve this rest of this sugar. And we're going to add that number with the other previous number. So we had 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, and that's a B part, 49 in our sample. So we think we got 49. Now we can go ahead and check how close we are to 300 bees by kind of slowly or more slowly releasing these adults and counting fast. So we could do that count that way. Okay, for our alcohol, we've got a slightly different collecting jar. This is one that was developed in Canada. This one has 2 jars joined together, and in the middle of that is our 8-mesh screen. We're going to collect our numbers in the same way. We're going to take out a brood frame. Now this is going to be a destruct. That is, we're going to end up killing the bees with the alcohol. So now we've got to be a little more careful that we don't collect a queen into here. So we're going to look first and do our search pattern, see if we see the queen. Looks pretty good that we do not.
Yep.
So again, in our sampling, we're not going to be able to put bees in this jar. So what we do in our sampling is we come back along the backs of the bees, and literally they fall into our collecting container. And usually they're confused at this point, so the chance of a sting, although possible, is not very likely. We got maybe half of what we want from the one side. Sometimes we'll go to a couple frames. An alternative to this is shake this frame and another frame into your, like a honey bucket, a white honey bucket. Put all the bees in there. Tap the honey bucket on its side. Get all the bees in the bottom corner, and then take a 1/2 cup scoop from that all those bees together, and then put that half scoop into your collecting container. Okay. So in this case now, as I indicated, we're going to use alcohol. We're going to use ordinary rubbing alcohol. You can use the real hooch, but if you're going to do that, take it first and then put the rest in there. That's for your troubles.
Now, how much alcohol do you need?
We want to again wash the bees, so we're going to fill up maybe half the jar, a third of the jar, with the alcohol. Now, in this case, we've got these co-joined jars, and again, now we're going to wash our adult sample of mites, and again with that swirling action. Now, this has brood on it. It's a little cool. It's in the 70s this morning, so we'll put it back in to let the bees get their body heat back in the brood area. You can use, in addition to rubbing alcohol, diethyl ether, which is car starter fluid. I think that's a bit of a cool way to dye.
It's also a fire hazard too.
Also a fire hazard around your smoker. You can use soapy water, but you'll get a lot of soap suds if you have a real soaping liquid. Others like window washer fluid, but what you want to try to avoid is something where the mites are going to float. The mites are going to float on top. You really want to get them well washed. So now I'm going to start my collecting sample by taking the alcohol. So what I've done is I've inverted my double jar, and in so doing, the alcohol then has then been sorted through, washed through the bees. The adult bee sample is held there at the top, and so then at the bottom I have my mite count sitting in my alcohol wash. In this case, what we can also do is go ahead and doubly wash them, and this does not hurt at all. So we're going to add just a little bit. We're going to add some more alcohol to our container, and this double container is handy for that. But again, if you have just the one jar, it'll work just as well. And again, this is kind of confirming that we have indeed washed all the bees. If we have a sample more than 300 bees, it's sometimes those mites can just get stuck in that sample material. Okay, so now I'm going to pour my liquid out with the mites coming out, pouring it through my sample of adult bees. Okay, and then I can do my count. You can look down through, or it's really very easy to kind of look up from below, and you'll see in the alcohol, and this is what you want for a wash material. You don't want to have the floaters because you're going to have a perspective. How are you going to count if you got some floating on the top versus on the bottom? But this is all cleared through the bottom, so we'll go ahead and start a count. Again, we're looking at same size. I'm going to start at this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 21, 22 I get here. We had 49, and in this sample we had 22. Same hive. A good thing that we could do at this point would be to average two different ways that we counted if you wanted to do the two counts. But in our case, we find that if we've got our 300 bees, then we have over our threshold. Now the threshold will vary with the mite numbers through the year, but we're doing an August count, and so we'd like to have the number ideally around 2%. 2% of mites on a number of adults that we have, but it will be higher at this time. So hopefully not much higher than 5 or even 10%. And so if we have 300 bees, and we had 49 and then 22, so we've got somewhere in the 30 range, 30 on 300, obviously 10% or a little bit better, which indicates that our mite numbers have gotten a little bit away from us on this particular counting. Now we have to decide if we want to do a mite control or not. What it's saying at 10% is this county has some risk of having the mite numbers go even higher on into September when the mite numbers will peak. And if we want to help the colony combat the mites and their possibility of transmission of virus, we need at this point to consider some sort of a control. So in our sample we wanted to have 300 bees, and so what we're going to do with the alcohol bees at this point, and by the way, as I did that, I find now there is 1, 2, 3, 4 more mites, so we are 26. So now I'm going to go ahead and count these bees. 310, 315, 320, 325, 330, 335, 340, 341, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46. So 346 in our alcohol sample. We had a total of 26 mites, and so now it's going to be 26 divided by the 346, and that gives us that percentage of mite load in a colony. We're going to do the same with our powder sample. We're going to count these bees. Now we're going to release them back directly into the hive. We can do this at the bottom board or into the hive, and you can get an approximation of the count just to see if you are in the vicinity of the 300. There are some bees that are going to go right away on our release here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77. Whoops, a queen. Just kidding. And so we've got 290, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 302, 303, 304 in that powdered sugar sample, and of course that was at half a cup in our container. So we did 304. We had 49 mites, so it would be 49 divided by the 304 adults. You can see here's our powdered sugar mass of bees, and they're quickly being assimilated right into the colony. Okay, part of the program of the Oregon Master Beekeeper Apprentice program is to team a new beekeeper with a mentor, and we want to try to have a minimum of 4 visits between mentor and mentee, and to record those and see the progress through a season, through a whole year. We have our sheets, and so what we're going to basically do on this is we have, this one is our nectar flow to honey extracting. So this would be a July into August visit. And so we would then have a discussion, things such as supering, how you manage the colony during the flow, after you've taken supers off, extracted, is storage of supering, other things that would then occur in this time frame, providing water, are you going to leave queen excluders on the colony, did you use them in the beginning, what is if there's a nectar dearth or robbing period. And so we would then confirm that we've had at least a discussion, that the apprentice beekeeper has had some familiarity with these aspects, and then we would sign off on those. So for a year's apprentice, between mentee and mentor, we're going to do 4 of these, each of them keyed to a different time of the season.
Thank you very much, Dewey, for helping me out and coming out and visiting and showing me how to do the mite counts. That was very great demonstration.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.